Carbon Management and Carbon Reduction at York St John University. In this presentation, three of us from the Energy and Environmental Management team in Estates Management at the university will be briefly running through what we've done in the past and what we've achieved so far in terms of carbon reduction. That's me, Jeremy Kemp. Then Sarah Williams will talk about what we've done in the recent past and what we are doing, recent projects. And then for the longer term view ahead, Stuart Middleton will take over towards the end. So what have we actually managed to achieve in terms of carbon emissions so far? Over the past decade, emissions have fallen by over 60% across the university estate. If you look at 2011-12, the middle one of the three red dots on this graph, from there until the last year we have complete data for on the right, 2020 to 21, there's only 1 year when emissions have increased. That's the red dot where the new Hall of Residence opened. That was York St John Central. And the opening of that single large building is entirely responsible for that little jump, or quite significant jump really, between 2013-14 and 14-15. A nice illustration of some of the consequences of expanding physical estate, an ongoing challenge. But from 2011-12 until now, a steady downward trend apart from on that one little blip. This is in spite of the fact that the numbers of students in the university have been going up steadily throughout that period. So on the left-hand side here, 2009-10, the university had just under 5,000 students, 5,000 full-time students. On the right, our most recent year for which we have full data, 2020 to 21, we had approximately 7,000. But over that time, the average emissions per student have fallen from over 1 tonne to just over 1/4 of a tonne, getting on for 75%. That's something we're very happy with. So how have we actually managed this? 4 broad areas: greater efficiency in energy use, more use of renewable energy, a greater mix of renewable energy in our energy consumption, less waste, and a concerted effort to move away from fossil fuels across the board. So efficiency, for example, an ongoing program for replacing all of the old-fashioned fluorescent and incandescent lighting on our sites with LED lighting, far more efficiency. Renewable energy, we've both been buying more renewable energy from the grid and started generating our own to a greater extent. The image on the right hand side of this is one of the several large photovoltaic arrays on top of some of the buildings that have recently been introduced that Sarah will be talking about in more detail. The Estates Department has also has installed much greater capacity for direct monitoring control to reduce waste. For example, we're now able to turn the heating off in parts of the university that are not being used when we know it's not being used, and we can do that in most cases from our own offices in St Anthony's House. We've also been reducing gas usage in favour of renewable electricity. It's obviously impossible to have completely carbon neutral burning of gas, whereas electricity is headed in that direction, and that is part of the greener grid. As the mix of electricity sources in the national grid moves away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy, the carbon intensity of national grid electricity decreases. So how do we know how we've done with this? Well, it's basically an awful lot of numbers and number crunching. We have an extensive system of electricity meters, both fiscal meters that actually count how much energy we use in order to pay the utility companies, and sub-meters which are there for our own purposes. So we have regular both automated and manual meter reading in various parts of the university, which between them provide us with a good level of resolution of how much energy is being used in which parts of the university. And here you can see a fairly typical, uninspiring but very useful section of a spreadsheet on the right, and on the left some of the automated monitoring output from automated monitoring software, in that case from our solar PV arrays. From this basic data we can say how much we're using in total, where the greatest energy use is and start to identify areas where we think it's possible to increase efficiency. So on Lord Mayor's Walk, for example, most of the individual buildings here are individually metered, and we can see where, for example, what is the greatest energy use per square metre in any one building, and we can work on that basis, just as an example. So in the longer term, our targets on the left-hand side, those are the curves one of the curves you've already seen. Our most recent year of data in the middle, 20 to 21. Then the blue line on the right, that's the average reduction per year needed to reach our targets of a 70% reduction by 2025 and an 80% reduction by 2030. Now, the 2030 target, we may raise that. It'll depend to some extent on what it is actually physically possible to do, which brings us to the next point, net zero. It's a necessary thing to have as a target, but if it's done carelessly or badly, it could resemble greenwashing. We don't want to fudge that. We want to make sure that if and when we have a net zero target, which we don't at the moment, if we do, it's a credible one. It is an achievable one. And similarly with the 80% target, if we do increase that target for reduction to say 85% or more, we want to make sure that we're confident we can actually do it. And that is something that we're working on at the moment to see how we can get to those points. So at that point, I will hand over to Sarah, who will talk about more recent work, actual physical projects on the ground that have been done recently. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Jerry. So I'm just going to talk through now, as Jerry explained, some of the more recent projects that we've had underway at York St John to help reduce carbon emissions. So we've had quite a few renewable energy projects that have been carried out over the past year, including installation of solar photovoltaics and air source heat pumps. And a first for us is having a battery storage system to store solar energy. We've had quite a few refurbishment projects running over recent years, particularly in student accommodation, and January 2022 we were lucky enough to open a new teaching building, the Creative Centre. So I'll mention a little bit about that. And also worth a mention is our shift to LED lighting over recent years in relation to carbon reduction. So this slide is just to give you a quick overview of some of the solar photovoltaic installations that we've managed to carry out. So as I mentioned earlier, it was May, well, it was 2021 that we carried this work out, started off in May, and we managed to install 6 separate photovoltaic arrays across rooftops on our campus, on our teaching campus and on our sports campus. So they're varying in size, as you can see from here, and a mixture of some flat roof buildings and some pitch roof buildings. And these were all relatively straightforward to access for installation, so some of the easier projects that we could do around our estates, and it made a lot of sense to go ahead and put these installations in, and these will make a decent contribution to a reduction in carbon emissions for us at the university. Particularly for the Fountains Learning Centre, you can see there 144.5 kilowatts of power there, quite a big system, and Foss and Scale Teaching Building with 120.7 kilowatts of power. So 5 buildings there, and a 6th, not building, but a 6th location to have solar PV installed is the Sports Centre, YSJ Sports Centre. So there we've got some solar carports installed. It's quite a large system. It's been oversized given the daytime energy consumption for the site, but the reason for that is that we've combined it with a battery storage system. So during the daytime, any excess solar energy is stored within the battery, and we then use that to power the lighting for the sports pitches on the site. So we're quite excited to see what sort of a difference that makes. That battery's only just come online at the end of 2021, so we're still learning from that about how much of a saving it's going to help achieve on that site in terms of carbon emissions. So we'll look forward to seeing some of the figures coming out through the year. Also at the site, contributing to carbon reduction, is an air source heat pump. So you can see a picture of it there, not particularly exciting looking, a bit of a metal box, but it should really help to reduce our gas consumption at the site. Air source heat pumps are relatively new at York St John University. This is the first time last year that we've installed them. There's this one on the sports centre, and we've installed another two, one on St Anthony's House, and another at one of our halls of residence, St John Central. So I'll be looking forward to seeing what kind of an impact those have on carbon emissions. So to give an overview then of those installations that we put in last year in 2021, we're expecting to see approximately 661,000 kilowatts saved each year from those. That equates to about 84.8 tonnes of CO2 emitted each year. And as an overview for the university as a whole, we expect that to achieve about a 5% reduction in the carbon emissions that we currently have. So quite a decent dent on those emissions there and bringing them down. I mentioned briefly about refurbishing buildings. So we have 4 accommodation sites for students. They're off our main campus, and we have a mixture of different ages of buildings there. And in recent years, we've taken our own maintenance team has taken on a full refurbishment of those. So in here we've got top left is St Mary's House, we've got Baldwin House bottom left, and City Halls of Residence. The 2 older buildings, St Mary's and City, are solid walled properties. So we've done some solid wall insulation internally in those buildings. All of the buildings have had window upgrades and heating upgrades. All of these did have night storage, electric storage heaters. Those have been removed and replaced with electric heating panels that heat on demand for the occupants, which has given a lot more control to the building occupants and means that the spaces are only heated when needed. And the impact of that has been a significant reduction in electrical consumption in those buildings and therefore carbon emissions. In addition to carrying out refurbishment projects, we have been lucky enough to have a new building constructed on our main teaching campus. So the Creative Centre is our newest building. It opened in January 2022, and it's got a mixture of teaching spaces and a 200-seat auditorium. So the building has been built to BREEAM Excellent standard. So we've already got a reduction in energy consumption as a result of that, and targeting some of the energy credits within that scheme. We also targeted quite a high standard of air tightness for this building to make sure that we didn't lose the benefit of all the heat that we've created for the building through unwanted draft. So we're particularly pleased with the air tightness for this one. And aside from the obvious heating of the building, we've gone for things like a lot of timber, as you can see from the image, to reduce the embedded carbon of the building materials. So moving on to the next slide, and the last one is just thought it was worth mentioning that quite a lot of work has been going on over a number of years to gradually transition over to LED lighting across all of our sites. We haven't had a major transfer over to LED. It's just been a gradual process where, as and when light fittings are damaged or a refurbishment of an area has taken place, we've replaced them with LED lighting. So images you can see here, these are all from our sports centre. The sports barn, we have LED lighting. All of our sports pitches are now lit with LED, and there's a image of the cafeteria there, which has got LED lighting. It's particularly noticeable in our waste streams, the change in lighting. We used to produce a lot of waste fluorescent bulbs, but those have really dropped off now as we've changed over to LED lighting. And no doubt the LED changeover will have contributed a good amount to our carbon reduction figures that we're seeing now. So I'm going to hand over to Stuart now, who will just talk through the what we have planned for future in trying to help meet our 2030 target for carbon reduction.
So what are we planning as our long-term strategy for carbon reduction? Well, one of the major things, as Jerry's touched on earlier, is that the electrical grid, which once was very carbon intensive, as you can see from the graph, much more so than gas, in fact, has been rapidly reducing in carbon usage as more renewable energy sources are being put onto the grid, and the older coal-fired and oil-fired power stations are being phased out. As you can see from the graph, it's not quite to where gas is in terms of CO2 per kilowatt at the moment, but it is getting there, and it's set to continue in the next 5 or 10 years. Potentially, according to the national grid, it could turn negative by 2033. So one of the main priorities for the future is to move away from gas as a heating source on campus. Currently, the heating and hot water on the main campus and at the sports centre is predominantly done by gas. So we'll be moving that over to electricity where we can. Now, this poses some problems, predominantly in terms of our current electrical capacity. So we'll be looking at what capacity upgrades we need to do to make that happen in the next year or two. We'll also be looking into efficient types of electrical heating that we can retrofit to our buildings, such as using heat pump technology. There are a couple of heat pumps in the picture there. As Sarah mentioned, we've already been trialing this using some air source heat pumps at one of our buildings on the main campus and up at the sports centre and one of our accommodation blocks. So we're trialing that now to see how effective they are. The new buildings that will be going up as we expand the university will be built to a very high standard in terms of efficiency and in terms of sustainability, such as the BREEAM Excellent standard, as we've been doing for the Creative Centre. Refurbishments of existing buildings and existing areas, classrooms and offices within the buildings will also include measures that we can use to increase the efficiency, as Sarah's touched on, using LED lights, and also increasing levels of insulation where we can, and better control over the systems using computer software that wasn't available when the building was built. We're also going to be looking at increasing our energy monitoring and analysis capabilities to identify priority areas that we can look to improving in the future. So that's a big part of finding out where we can reduce carbon usage. We also currently have a contract which buys 25% of the electricity on campus direct from a wind farm, and we'll be looking to increase this percentage in the near future, so that sort of bypassing the normal ways that electricity is purchased and buying it direct from renewable sources. Finally, we're going to be doing a lot of work on energy use awareness on campus. The way people use equipment has a great effect on power demand, of course, and therefore the carbon used. So we'll be encouraging staff and students to bear this in mind, that their day-to-day habits can have a greater reduction in carbon usage, just by, for example, turning off lights if they're the last person to leave the room, making sure computers and screens are powered down when not in use, and checking rooms that aren't being heated that don't need to be, turning radiators and down, etc. So those are the main things that we're going to be looking at in the coming years. Some big hitters such as reducing gas, and also the smaller things but quite effective in terms of habits and using new technologies. And we'll always have an eye out to any new technologies that arise that we think will be viable or useful for what we're trying to do on campus. So I hope this has given you a bit more of an insight into how the university is working towards its carbon reduction targets. And from Jerry, Sarah and I, thank you for watching.